Hello, I'm Dina Al-Nagar and I work on communications at the World Bank. This week we've opened up our spring meetings with social media and your questions. I'm here with Barkha Dutt, one of India's best journalists and television anchors, and with more than 500,000 people following her on Twitter. Barkha, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Our first question comes from India. Job creation is a universal challenge. What do you think is holding back progress on this agenda?
Well, I think quite simply, there are more people than there are jobs. How the economy performs is related to how many new jobs can be created. In India, we're also grappling with a history of inequities. In other words, there are people who have traditionally lived on the margins, people we refer to sometimes as scheduled castes. Those are people who've been the victims of historical prejudices. So there is what we call affirmative action or quotas or reservations for them. And that further shrinks the general pool that is available for jobs. So the only answer really to job creation is for the economy to get stronger, for the GDP to grow higher, for the growth story to in a sense revive. And the India growth story, while doing well compared to the rest of the world, is not doing as well as it should have. So I would say the need of the hour is reform, reform, and more reform.
Thank you. Our second question is from Pakistan. Do you think that a mutual demilitarization of the Pakistan-Indian border would help create trade in the region? I know you participated in a session today on regional integration, so what are your views on this?
Well, it's actually quite interesting that in my own experience as a journalist, I have reported quite extensively from the border, or the line of control as we call it, that separates India and Pakistan. I've seen it through some of its worst moments when there was actually firing across the line of control, and I've also seen more than 10 years of a ceasefire hold. And because there is relative peace, though the relationship between the two countries still remains troubled, because there is relative peace along the line of control, you do now have the perfect opportunity to mobilize trade in a much larger way than has been in the past. You already have this happening in Kashmir, for example. You have now a bus that moves from the Indian side of Kashmir to the other side on the Pakistani side. It started ferrying trade. Earlier, it used to only ferry divided families who wanted to meet their relatives on the other side of the border. Similarly, we've had an integrated check post open up on the Punjab border that joins India and Pakistan. So yes, in answer to the question from Pakistan, I absolutely think that while we may not be able to resolve other things, if we increase our trade relations, it will help at least change the conversation. It will add another layer, and the conversation won't always be about conflict and differences.
Thank you. Well, that was very good. Another question from India. How can the World Bank help India implement the right to education? And is there any role for the private sector in supporting the RTE?
I think it's a great question. Just for everybody to understand, the RTE is the right to education, and recently the Supreme Court of India upheld the constitutional validity of the law that basically says that even private schools that get absolutely no money from the government will have to keep 25% of their seats for poor students. There's been a huge debate over this in my country with critics saying that, look, this is an infringement on the autonomy of the school. Now, what the schools are really worried about is where are they going to get the money. The government is offering some reimbursement for these costs, but the schools are worried about their finances. So I can imagine if the World Bank were to create a corpus of funds that were available, like a trust for private schools to dip into, monitored, of course, by the state, that would go a long way in allaying their fears.
What are your thoughts when you're reporting from a conflict zone?
Well, I've reported from so many, most recently last year from Egypt and Libya, but a lot of time spent in reporting some of the worst years in Kashmir when things were not so good, when militancy was frequent. That was about a decade ago. I've reported a frontline war between India and Pakistan. What are the thoughts? Quite honestly, the thoughts are just how to get the story on air. That's the first thought. And that thought has a way of pushing the fears into a box that you actually just hope you won't have time to visit. Because if you get very aware of the risks, you can't do your job. So you block out, the danger, which you walk in with your eyes open, and you focus almost completely. When I covered the Kargil conflict between India and Pakistan, it was before the age of either mobile phones or satellite uplinks. And I used to send my tapes back to New Delhi in the helicopters that carried the bodies back. So instead of saying, okay, this is life and death, how am I going to get this tape back? So I think what you actually think of is A, how to get the story on air, how to get the news back to headquarters, and how to tell the story in a way that is fair, that is humane, and that covers all shades of the truth.
And our last question from Ethiopia and India is, where do you see the challenges and opportunities to closing the gender gap?
Great question. I come from a paradoxical country where some of the most powerful women in the country or rather some of the most powerful people in the country are women. The president of our country is a woman, the leader of opposition is a woman, the head of the ruling party is a woman, the speaker in parliament is a woman. And yet we are a country where girls are killed before they are born. Female infanticide, and even education hasn't solved the problem because it happens more in the cities than it does in the villages. And therefore, how do I see closing the gender gap? I always say that if mothers bring up their sons to think differently, and if there were more emphatic and strong women role models, then maybe that horrific prejudice that kills a girl while she's in the womb would stop. But I think it's one of the things that we need to really think about deeply. The paradox of a country that was among the first to give women the right to vote, it was a non-starter, where so many women are so powerful and where the girl child is killed before birth.
Barkha, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us at World Bank Live.